Hi and welcome to Boston Media Theory. I'm Marcus Breen, and this is a program where we talk to people who are doing research and writing, investigations, consultancies, all sorts of things to do with media and communication in the city of Boston. And today we're delighted to have, or I'm delighted to have, Charlie Sennott here. Charlie is going to talk to us about journalism in Boston and journalism more generally and the project that he's working on, which I think it'd be fair to say when we hear about it maybe we'll be better able to judge, but a project that seems to represent just where Boston is, but where, more importantly, where journalism is in the total scheme of things. So welcome to Boston Media Theory, Charlie.
Thanks, Mark.
The name of your project is Ground Truth, and it's a relatively new initiative. So would you mind giving us a little, like a brief summary of what Ground Truth Project is?
Sure. The Ground Truth Project is dedicated to supporting, training a new generation of journalists to tell the most important stories of their generation in the world and in the United States. We're based at WGBH. We're a nonprofit. We build teams and work with young journalists, and we partner with editorial news organizations like Frontline, PBS NewsHour, Public Radio International's The World, and WGBH News, The Atlantic Magazine, and others. We're based at WGBH, so we're in a great family there, proud to be part of a campus here in Boston of excellence, right? They're producing a great deal. The majority of the national public media that's produced in this country comes out of GBH, and so to be in that sort of community of excellence really helps us. And then we take our young reporting fellows, as we call them, and we put them out into the field all over the world. And we focused our reporting internationally mostly when we started about 5 years ago. And the international reporting was mostly on divided societies and struggling democracies. And in the last year, it's become very clear we live in one.
Yeah, right. Unfortunately.
So we have decided to really double down on our national reporting. We really think there's a lot of skills we've developed in reporting on divided societies that I'm really sad to say, and I don't want to be too cynical. It really is sad to say that some of those skills are applicable here in the United States, how you approach stories in deeply divided societies where there's potential for violence. Yeah, and I think, sadly, we live in a moment like that, so we're very focused on that, but we also maintain our global reach, and we think a lot about global issues, even though we report locally and we report nationally.
That's a huge remit, and I'm very interested in a couple of things that you mentioned. One in particular is this idea of taking young journalists or trainees and putting them through what is a year with your team?
It depends. We have about 35 or so fellowships a year. Some are between a month or 3 months, and some of them are a year, or even we've had more than a year. We've had projects where we really sustain a team of young journalists or a young journalist for over a year. We just did a big project in Somalia on climate change, how the conflict in Somalia can be seen through the prism of climate change. Wow. You could really see it as a war, in some ways, caused by climate change. 2 young women did an amazing series for us, and they spent about 1.5 years on this. We did it in partnership with ABC News Nightline, The Atlantic Magazine, Foreign Policy Magazine, PRI The World. We did a photo exhibit in New York City at what's called Photoville. We did a big partnership with WGBH News, Jim Browdy, and Greater Boston. And this project is reflective of sort of what we want to do, which is to fund young people to do great work and then have that work be immersive multimedia work that's layered and presented throughout different traditional media partners who expand our reach. So we're quite small, but our reach is very significant through the partnerships we have.
I can see that, and it's a fascinating way of thinking about what media has become, which is no longer simply your daily newspaper. It's it's any number of immersive opportunities.
I think of it like, you know, it's you have back in the day when we had our big speakers, like Bose speakers, and you had your turntable, and you had all of your stereo equipment, and now we just need a phone and we can plug in, but with the right amplification you can reach an amazing audience. So we think of ourselves as very much as a small news organization that through our partnerships, we can amplify our audience into the millions. And so it gives us as a small team an ability to have the work that these really talented young people do. These are not students, these are just emerging journalists.
That was one of my questions.
With, say, 3 to 5 years experience or so. So we're trying to capture the digital natives, emerging journalists who are really smart about the future of storytelling, give them the funding they need and the opportunities they need, and allow them to go out and tell really big stories. And they punch way above their weight class. They are winning big awards. Our team this year, our Ground Truth Films team won the DuPont Award, which is a prestigious award for a series that we did in Afghanistan. We've won a lot of different awards from the Online News Association. We were a finalist for an Emmy. It's really extraordinary work that when given a chance, when given the opportunity and the funding, that we're seeing these young teams do.
I have to go back to your analogy of giving up the record player and the
I
the
still
big
love
speakers.
vinyl, by the way.
Right, me too. And I was going to say, I recently just purchased a whole new system from a wonderful second-hand dealer not far from where I live.
Great.
And the speakers are pretty big, and I can crank that thing up, and I put a old, 1980s, I don't know, squeeze or something on, and off we go. And in fact, the other day my wife came in and told me to turn it down. But be
it's
that
a full circle moment.
Well, it's a full circle moment, but I also want to use that analogy to suggest that the nature of journalism hasn't changed. Just like we still, we can go back to and we can keep the standards of what really matters about public reporting, about journalism. And I know I've heard you talk about this kind of thing, this kind of principle, if you like, here on WGBH Radio, the importance of having journalism function as one of the few remaining tools for the public, for the discourse within society. Is that sort of something that you'd say the Ground Truth project has as a motivation?
Very much so. Very much so, and that's really well framed. That's exactly what we hope to do. We work really hard to do that. I think to sort of step back and put it simply, I guess I feel like the crisis in journalism is becoming a crisis for our democracy. And so I came at this 10 years ago, starting to want to do a more entrepreneurial approach to working in the future of media and really working toward online news organizations, thinking about going forward. And I would say this moment that we're in now is a 10-year collapse of the way we think of news. And it's a revolutionary moment, but it's a very disruptive moment. And we all know that, and we all feel it. But I think it's really gotten to the point where some of the erosion of good old-fashioned hardcore reporting, good, honest, non-biased, nonpartisan reporting is so eroded that it is allowing us to fall apart as a society. I think civic discourse is lessened by the fact that we don't have these places where we get reasoned debate, where we hear from all sides. We still have great news organizations in this city and around the country that do that. The Boston Globe, where I worked for many years, is still a great news organization. They're still doing great work. WGBH is a powerhouse putting out great news. But there is a feeling of crisis that I think is very real and very genuine, and I think we're trying at Ground Truth to be some part of being part of the solution to that crisis.
I think the use of the word crisis is instructive. I don't doubt for a minute that we're in a crisis at a number of levels. Politically, socially, ideologically, however we want to put it. And there seems to me to be a special obligation, if you like, on journalists and media organisations. And I'm wondering whether or not that can be sustained, or whether it's always going to be this sort of endless attempt to try and claw back the things that have been lost, particularly as public attitudes change. The idea of a president who tweets changes the calculation of how you get news and information.
Sure. Well, we had a president who tweeted in President Obama, too. It's just how you tweet.
Right, okay. Yeah, important distinction, isn't it?
Well, I think I'm really excited about the moment we're in for journalism in the terms of the future of storytelling. I think there's really creative opportunities right now to think about immersive multimedia storytelling, and that's a lot of what we do at the Ground Truth Project. And you know, I'm heading this project up, but I learn every day from these younger journalists who we work with, who are new in their career and who have really different ideas of how to tell a story and really good ideas about how to tell a story.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot for them to learn from those of us who still believe in like shoe leather, good old-fashioned reporting, be on the ground. That's the name of our organization, Ground Truth. It's about being there on the ground. But we also think we have a lot to learn together about where this can go in the future of media. I'm really excited about the long term. I'm very worried about the moment we're in.
Yes, right. I can see that, and I think many people share that concern. And the fact of the matter is that the very nature of journalism, or the nature of reportage, has changed. And I'm not entirely convinced, and so I suppose you'll have to convince me of the importance of storytelling versus the importance of criticism, and where journalism, as it currently is constituted, can be seen as having two different streams. One, storytelling, which might tend more towards the, if you like, entertainment, as opposed to criticism, which might tend more towards the informational and decision-making within a democracy.
I'm not sure I would break it down quite that way. I think in the end of the day, journalism really is about the service of going into a community and listening to that community and telling its story.
Okay.
The way you tell that story is in a lot of different forms. You might cover City Hall, and you go in and you need to dig out the city budget, and you have to go in and really see how the city's money is being spent for the people who live there, so they know what's going on. Maybe you cover education and you're in the classrooms, or you're in the Board of Education and you're talking to families about how are the schools doing. You could be someone who covers sports. You could cover a number of different things, but you're telling the story of that community, and that's what I mean by storytelling. I mean the great human need for us to be connected together as a community around great stories. I come from a family of storytellers. That's still legend, and it's still something that I think a lot of families have, where you sit down and you tell the same stories, or you tell the new stories, and that art pulls people together. And I worry in an age of that becomes too digital and too fractured, that we're losing out on some of that. So I've been doing international reporting for much of my life. I've had more than 25 years of covering the Middle East. I think of myself very much as someone who's done foreign reporting, but I'm feeling very drawn back to local reporting. And I started there, and I got to come of age at a time when there was a lot of blue sky in journalism. And I had a tremendous opportunity through the Boston Globe to travel the world and tell the story of different parts of the world back to an audience in Boston that was my home. That's an extraordinary gift. I really will always just feel so lucky to have done that for the Boston Globe. But I really do feel myself going back to local, to when I used to do local reporting, and I feel like that's what's missing the most right now. That's what we're really missing and we need more of, and we're really trying to work in that direction.
Well, one of the contributions that the field of cultural studies has made, at least academically, is this question of location. Not only where a story or where a narrative is located, but then where the person who's writing about it is located.
Right.
And what that location in some ways means. Now, the location obviously not only refers to geography, but it refers to their class, it refers to their gender, it refers to their preferences, ideologically and politically. And then understanding that then becomes part of a larger story about the context. And it seems to me that one of the things that resonates with me when you're talking about the local is exactly the sort of claims that cultural studies has suggested. How is something located? Well, meaning is located where people live, right? Where they navigate the day-to-day. And that's maybe the point around which digital media is most powerful. Even though it's global, it can give
it's powerful, but it's weakened too, because the tendency we have when we go online is to be pulled into places where news is being aggregated and sent our way that isn't about our local community. We're being pushed to websites, to Fox, to MSNBC, to very polarized media, or to a very sort of national and globally focused media. And it I think, can sometimes deceptively create the impression that we're more divided than we actually are. If you define yourself as whether you listen to Fox or MSNBC, and you define yourself as whether you are pro-gun or anti-gun, you're missing the opportunity to see where you come together around the conservation of a forest in your hometown,
Right. Yeah.
or around sidewalks for your city.
Mhm.
And that strips away red and blue.
Right.
And it pulls people together in community. And I'm worried that the collapse of local news might be running parallel to the collapse of civility in our argument and how we discuss things as a country. Because there was a time when you could sit down and reason things out a little more, and I'm old enough to remember that time.
Right.
And I'm sort of, I think we are all saddened by how raw and crass the discourse has become so quickly. I mean, it's happened over many years, but in the last year, it's just accelerated. And I think everyone I know, whether they are a Republican or a Democrat or red or blue, whether they like to hunt or they hate guns, or the people in my life who I know actually can come together around a lot of issues. I just don't think there's enough news organizations that are trying to look at those. So we just finished a story called, a project really called Crossing the Divide. 5 young reporters who we recruited from red states and blue states.
Right.
We put them in one van with 2 field producers. So 7 journalists, 1 van, traveling across the country, looking at stories from 5 states. So from Massachusetts, we began here. We then went to Kentucky, traveled up the Mississippi River to Minnesota, from Minnesota to Montana, Montana to California. And we looked at different stories along the way, sort of issues that divide us, but stories that can unite us. That was our operating theme. And this team of young journalists did some really great work. They really just wrapped up. They just completed just before Thanksgiving in California, and today we're putting the last chapter of the reporting from California is up on the site. But it's what I think we learned as a team. I mean, they were on the ground every day. I was kind of with the other editors. We were coming in at various stops. But what we were hearing from the reporters who were doing the reporting on the ground is that the closer you get to the issues that divide us, the more micro fissures there are. There aren't big cracks. It's much smaller. And my favorite example of that was the team was reporting on wildfires in Montana. If you're looking at the wildfires in Montana, really serious issue that impacts everyone. Smoke rises up, it creates ash that comes down on communities. The communities suffer from that. It destroys beautiful forests. It destroys the timber industry. It has a tremendous impact on everyone in the state, whether you're red or blue. It's a state that has blue cities and bright burning red countryside, predominantly red. And when you say to people, what do you think of the wildfires, everyone would agree this is terrible. Everyone would agree we got to put them out. Everyone would agree we have to do something about this. Everyone would agree the state budgets need to have more money for putting out fires. Everyone would agree the federal government needs to give more money to the state to put out the fires. The second you call it climate change, bang, you have the split.
Okay.
Now, I don't want to diminish the science that would suggest that it is climate change contributing to that. But the question is that where you begin the discussion? Because if you begin it there, you're in a divide. But if you can begin it on where people come together, I think there are some really important storytelling to be done. And one of the firefighters was talking to the reporters and literally was so frustrated by the media, he just stood on this hillside and started telling them, yelling, media, listen to me.
Really?
Get this right. And he said, the fires burn in this part of the country in a pattern that is a mosaic. And I thought that is an amazing metaphor for where we are as a country. We feel like it is burning hot and we're on fire with divisions. But actually the patterns and the way he talked about the burn patterns and the way in which a controlled burn is the way to fight the fire, and a controlled burn can actually be good for the forest. And the question is to get it right, what's happening with the fires. And I thought, like, this is the kind of stuff we need to do. We need to be down on the ground with forest fighters, listening to climate change, if you want to call it that, happening in real time. And how are people really working on different kinds of solutions and understandings, and how are they listening to each other? And The Native American population has so much to offer because they understand the history of fires, that they're part of that part of the world.
Yeah.
I just feel like we're missing a lot. I think there's too much journalism on the coasts. We know this, and we've heard of this argument, but it's true. We've got to get out. We've got to get into communities where we're not there and we're not listening closely enough, and we've got to be better at our job. Journalism needs to take a step back and really reflect right now about some of the failures we've had.
I certainly enjoy hearing you talk about this model of finding a commonality, if you like, the sort of humanistic aspect of what it means to be a citizen in this country in particular, and then to have a sense of place in your locality where you work. However, I have to also say that I'm a little bit sceptical in that it seems to be kind of optimistic without taking into account the really severe challenges that people face that in some ways make it impossible for them to address the kinds of commonalities that you're thinking or suggesting might actually be possible. You know, people are living in greater poverty in many places, as you know, in flyover country, as we on the coast call it, than ever before. And if you're experiencing real deprivation, I don't think it matters how much someone like you or I might want people to come in together and have a conversation. You just can't do it. I mean, the material conditions are just too bad, too difficult.
Sometimes. I think you're right. Sometimes. I think we need to get out there and see that for real with our own eyes. And we did Crossing the Divide, but I think one of the weaknesses, to your point, that I saw in the model of Crossing the Divide was that we turned those states from a flyover state to a drive-through state. You can't just drive through. It's no different than flying over if you don't spend enough time. So while we were very impressed by the hard work that the team put in to trying, they were frustrated that they didn't have enough time on the ground. We began to see that these issues are just too complex to really get at in a meaningful way by doing reporting along the way. And so we've started to really move toward changing the model, and we have an initiative that is very big. We're really excited about it, and it's called Report for America. We're trying to take a page from the public service movement in America that was sort of framed by Teach for America, by City Year here in Boston, founded by Alan Casey, a Massachusetts resident and dear friend of mine, by the Peace Corps, by the other service movements in this country that addressed deep problems, whether they were inner city problems or the need for education reform through service. We think it's a moment that we need service for journalism. So we are literally trying to call people to service. We're saying to these emerging young journalists, come and work with us and come and serve communities that don't have news organizations, where there are news deserts. And let's go in there and start telling those stories in partnership with local news organizations that are really diminished, really struggling. How can we be part of planting some seeds and some green shoots into those communities so that really smart, talented, digital native journalists can get in there and work to tell the stories and do some of the work that really needs to be done. And I think it's important for our democracy that we do this. I think journalism's the cornerstone of our democracy. Journalism is badly eroded, and we need to restore it.
And I like the idea, especially as you've described it, going to the green shoots thing, of news deserts, of these vast tracts of land of the country, towns and villages and cities, that really don't have the opportunity for the citizens to gather information about themselves, to know what's even going on in their town. I mean, wouldn't Detroit and the problem with, or Flint, Michigan, I should say, and the problem with their water be a case in point? People didn't even know that this brown stuff coming out of the taps was toxic and killing them. And the reason was that initially there was no information, there was no news about it.
I'm really proud to say that one of the young women who we recruited from Kentucky to be on this Crossing the Divide tour did an internship in Flint, Michigan.
Yeah, really.
And as an intern was meeting poor people who kept saying there's something wrong with the water. She went out and did some of the earliest photographs of this crisis, and she's got a real eye for that. Her name's Brittany Greason, and her work is featured on our site. She's an extraordinary young journalist and photographer. But even more to the point of where are we? We're really excited about getting into these communities because we need to do a better job, and Google News Lab is getting behind this idea of Report for America. So they've just announced that they will give us sort of cornerstone funding so that we can build this to scale. And we're going for a very ambitious build to get this year 12 reporters will be chosen and then dispatched in 2018. The next year is 28. After that it's 250. And we're trying to get to 1,000 reporters by 2022.
That's fantastic. And it
We
really sounds great.
We really think we can do it. And we really think stories like Flint with Google's tools, one of the things Google talks about is how you can use algorithms and tools to try to understand local stories. And when you said Flint, it made me think of it. You can geo-fence search words in Google. And if they had geo-fenced in Flint for 6 months prior to when the story broke, they would have seen that one of the most searched terms was, what's wrong with the water?
Oh, really? Okay.
And this is what, we want to use the Google funding, but we also want to rely on Knight Foundation, Ford Foundation, many different foundations to say we want digital and we want technology and innovation, but we really want to be about old school reporting and being there on the ground.
We've got about 3 minutes left,
Okay.
and so I want to just wind up with this question about how this is going to be paid for. Journalists have generally been considered professionals and need to make a living just like everybody else.
Right.
Is this new model, the Google returning funding to communities, part of what will be a mix?
I hope so. I think
think?
Google should do that. I think Google's trying to do that in some small scale ways, but I don't want to count on Google.
No.
I don't want to be owned by Google. I do want to say that Google is an extraordinary organization with amazing innovation, and I think they're recognizing that their algorithms, their profit margins, are based largely on search for content that's created by news organizations. And if those news organizations die, we lose the information we need as a country, but they lose a business model. So I think we have their ear. I think they're interested. We're really speaking loudly to them. Google and Facebook take approximately 80% of every ad dollar on the web. That leaves nothing for news organizations. We need to turn that around. So we're trying to come up with a model where we've come up with a funding formula that asks the news organizations to invest some, that asks the community to invest some, that asks Google to invest some, the foundations, and we're creating a matching formula so that it's really about the community and the news that it needs, and no one owns it. It's got to come from the community, and it's got to be of service to the community, and that is really at the heart of Report for America.
Well, it sounds like a remarkable and exciting opportunity, and I'm wondering whether there's, in a few seconds, a kind of way that you'd imagine what the horizon looks like for journalism.
I don't know if I can do it in a few seconds. I would say ultimately the horizon looks good. I believe in the future. I believe that we're in a revolutionary moment, and I think there's a lot of excitement building around the way we can tell stories in the future. But right now, we're not on the horizon. We're in the forest, and we're in a crisis, and we've got to save journalism. And we've got to really think about how we're going to do that. And how we're going to do it, I think, is by bringing a new generation along, relying on the mentors of a former generation, my generation. I hope that we can hand down some of these lessons and get a new generation to fall in love with the adventure of being a reporter in a small town. It was a big thing to do when I was coming of age a long time ago. I want to bring that back. I think it's a wonderful way to see your country, see your community, be a part of it, and be of service. And I guess what I want to do is go not just after the business model, we need to do that too, but I think we need to heal the heart of journalism and really reconnect it back to service.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks, Charlie.
Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Wonderful
Thanks.
to hear those.
Great conversation. Thank
all right,
you.
Well, you're welcome. So that's it from us, from me, Marcus Breen, and Boston Media Theory. Until next time, please keep on mediaing, and see you later.